Hi students, welcome to our first lesson of Sociology 2333, Social Problems. This is Mrs. T, and we're going to dive right in with discussing what the overall focus of the class is and doing some review of some of the basic sociological concepts that are really going to be key for your understanding in the way that we approach the topic of social problems in sociology. Okay, so behind me on the board, I've got some key things written down. You need to take notes on this. You can type them out, you can write them out however you want to, but make sure that while we're discussing this, please note that I have just, words and phrases written on the board, and I'm going to refer to these words and phrases and discuss them with you. But you need more in your notes than just what's on the board behind me. You need to pause the video regularly and write down some details that I give to you about certain things so that you're able to understand your notes when you go back to them in the future, because the weekly reaction papers are supposed to be a summary of your notes. The quiz questions come from your notes and your reading assignment, all that kind of stuff. So you need notes that make sense to you instead of just the bare bone minimum that I've got on the board behind me in most of the videos. Okay, so let's get into it. So social problems is the title of our class. It's the title of your textbook, and let's define it. What we need to do is define what this means, because it's a little more complicated than it sounds. We have to be able to use our sociological knowledge to understand how we approach this topic. So a social problem is simply something that exists in a society, a circumstance that exists in society, an issue, a condition that exists in a society, and some people in that society, the government or elderly people or a minority group or some kind of portion of that society perceives that issue as problematic for themselves or for others, and they want to fix that problem so that it can stop being an issue for themselves or for others. And so a social that's how we define a social problem. It has two different perceptions. Number one, objective. The objectivity of a social problem is the fact that it exists in the first place. Like poverty is an issue that exists in our society. So objectively, we can say, okay, poverty exists in society. So that's one part of making it potentially a social problem. But the subjectivity part of a social problem is, are there portions of society, categories of people, for instance? Here's a review to go back and look in your sociology notes what a category of people means. There are some people in society, large portions of a population, entire organizations, who perceive that issue as problematic. They perceive it as harmful, oppressive. You fill in the negative word there. If the circumstance that exists in society is perceived as negative for yourself, your group of people that you belong to, or another group of people that you observe is being harmed, that is the subjective side of a social problem. So again, poverty. If you look at the condition of poverty in our society in the USA, we can certainly say, yes, it exists, but depending upon what point of view you take. Are you going to take a structural functionalist point of view? Are you going to take a social conflict point of view? If you take a structural functionalist point of view, they would say, yes, poverty exists. Yes, it's not an ideal circumstance, but society on the macro scale needs poverty to exist for the whole economic system to work, for the education system to work the way that it does, for jobs and the job force to work the way that it does. Poverty is an integral part of the structure of society that all sorts of social institutions have been built up and around to support the fact that poverty exists. We have certain industries that would not get filled. Let's face it. Would you be a janitor at a hotel? Would you be an orderly in a hospital that cleans up pee-pee and poo-poo and all this kind of stuff? Would you do these kinds of yucky jobs that don't take a whole lot of skill, but and don't pay very well either. Would you take those jobs if you had an alternative, right? So the fact that people are hungry enough, the fact that people need a job badly enough is the reason why, according to a functionalist point of view, so we're talking about subjectivity here. According to a functionalist point of view, poverty is not something that needs to be fixed entirely. Maybe we can improve life circumstances in poverty, but according to a functionalist, they would say, let's not fix it because it's part of the system and we can make life a little bit easier with things like housing vouchers or school choice or free breakfasts and lunch at school and these kinds of things. Maybe we can make poverty a little bit easier to take because it's such a necessary element in our society. So there is a circumstance that exists in society, but based on that subjective point of view, it's not an issue that needs to be fixed, at least not entirely, just band-aids maybe. But from a social conflict point of view, when you're looking at resources being available and controlled by one particular category of people, the wealthy, for instance, the haves, and then everybody else in poverty, the have-nots, there is no opportunity. From that point of view, the subjective attitude about poverty is that there is no opportunity to ever gain anything in your lifetime, and definitely not even generationally. Not even your grandchildren should have hope to be out of that impoverished circumstance, because the structure of society is built from a social conflict point of view. It's built to give advantages to those who already have the resources and to disadvantage those who do not have, the have-nots, who do not have those social resources. And so social problems are tricky to work at and iron out because there are so many gray areas to discuss. The only side that's simple is the fact that we can objectively look at the structure of society, the social institutions that are in place, and the different categories of people that have to go through those social institutions with potentially different outcomes based on those categories. And we can look at that. The fact that that exists is the objective side. But the subjectivity is where the really interesting nuances come into play. You're going to be able to use political perspectives, religious point of view, sociological theories to interpret these kinds of things. And so this is really the focus of what we're going to look at, different cultural ideas about whether something is an issue or not. We've got a chapter on mental health, for instance, and in some countries, predominantly in Latin American countries, depression, certainly chronic depression and mental illnesses like that are not really part of the cultural scope. They're not, it's not that they're not tolerated, but there's so much intrusive inclusion among family members that if you're depressed or if you're blue, we'll drag you out of it, kind of. And we don't even have a word necessarily for mental disease or depression or something like that in some societies around the world. So there's another aspect of subjectivity. What is your cultural background? Because you're going to have a different idea about whether some circumstance is problematic or not. Okay, so this is going to be a fun class. You're going to be able to use the points that you liked the most from your sociology class and really chew on some meat about all these different topics that we're going to discuss. I suggest you look at the table of contents for our textbook. It's an ebook that's linked online. Look at the table of contents and you'll be able to see the different topics that we're going to discuss. I think we have time to hit every single chapter because I think there's only 14 or 15 chapters and we've got 16 weeks ahead. So we're going to try to hit every single chapter, either all or some of that chapter, to look at these different topics. And so while you are looking at the next couple of videos that are required for week 1, you can consider all the topics that we anticipate covering and the issue of subjectivity, definitely, regarding social problems, and maybe write a reaction paper for me this week. You're a little bit more advanced than my other students, and so I don't usually encourage students the very first week to hit the ground running and do a reaction paper, but y'all are professionals, so to speak, and so please make sure that you familiarize yourself a lot with what the reaction paper assignment is and also the quizzes, because those come at you weekly, but you don't have to do them weekly. So if you need to review the information about those assignments found in the course logistics folder, please do that, and consider getting one of those reaction papers out of the way this first week, especially after you watch the next couple of videos that you're required to watch before you take that quiz. So text me if you have any questions. I'm really looking forward to the deep dive that we're going to be able to make with some of the topics we're covering this semester, and I hope you're looking forward to it also. See you next time.